Welcome. Tonight, we gather the remnants of our humanity, slipping through our bloody hands. The things that lurk in the dark of a city or of our minds, and the threadbare membrane between our world and one much darker. To bring you a review of Tattered Façade, a sourcebook for Vampire the Masquerade. This is your first book review of mine. I don't do traditional reviews. I don't give it a rating or say this is a good book or bad book. I talk about what the book is, the intention of the book, and if it accomplishes what it intended to do. Then we're going to do a detailed chapter by chapter dive. And then finally, I give my overall sort of opinion and thoughts at the end if you're still there. So let's jump into it. So what is Tattered Façade? I'll share their little snippet about it. The Kindred present a blank screen to the outside world, the Masquerade. But behind it, horrors accumulate on the streets of their cities, in the halls of their courts, and in the blood in their veins. The horror overflows in predatory killings, in twisted uses for vampiric power and position, and in a million spatters and shards. They slowly shred the facade of the Masquerade, and what we see behind it is a panoply of horror. Behind the tattered facade lies many shadows, and all of them conceal darker secrets still, from the Masquerade machine itself to the worst things waiting for it to fail. This book details the ecology and deepens the horror of Vampire the Masquerade by working with the game systems to choose a shade of darkness: body horror, gothic horror, folk horror, or even cosmic horror. So what does that mean? This is a source book that really is intended to dive into the horror side of Vampire. And I'll admit, initially, that pitch seemed a little redundant to me because horror is so baked in to Vampire the Masquerade. But as you'll see as we get into it, they really were able to sort of get into the meat of this and provide a lot more options and content and inspiration and thoughts about horror in general that really filled this book out nicely and makes it, I think, a pretty worthwhile addition to Vampire the Masquerade. And also, I should note, this book came out at a very good time because I'm running a Dark Ages Chronicle on Startplaying. And some of the horror I really wanted to lean into, kind of specific to the time, some of the historical, supernatural, religious, almost cosmic horror. This book provided some things that, again, I always think I'm built different. I'm like, I don't need advice on how to do this. I've been doing this. And then I read this thing, it's like, oh, these are some really cool ideas I didn't think of. Let me use this too. And I did that a lot with this book. So if you're looking for a chronicle and you want to explore some Dark Ages Vampire, you should hop in now. I'm super stoked to run it, and I want to do it as soon as possible. So get in there. You don't even have to finish this video. You could do that now and then come back and watch this. And then hopefully soon get to play some Dark Ages horror with me. There's a link to that below, of course. Go there so I don't spend more time in what I'm sure is going to be a very long video on a different topic. Just check it out. So some more verbiage from the book itself. The book focuses on the things the Kindred do in the dark, to coin a phrase, stalk and kill, and conceal their depredations from the light. It throws a flickering light on what happens to the bodies and what further horrors vampires might inflict upon them, completing the cycle of this ecology and predation. The theme of this book is T.S. Eliot's phrase, the skull beneath the skin. Hey, T.S. Eliot, shout out to St. Louis. Applied to everything in the Dark Knight world of the Kindred. Everything in Vampire is worse and more horrifying than it appears at first. This is a book of second looks. I really like that. And in more concrete terms, what's actually in the book, they have, for the player side of things, quite a bit actually. They have some new disciplines, disciplines that are a little more on the horror, more fucked up side of already some pretty disturbing disciplines, and they have some really, really fascinating ones in here. They have new archetypes, which, again, is something that I've overlooked a little bit in the past, but are really interesting in this, and I'm definitely going to be sharing some specifics of some of my favorites. They expand on the hunting mechanics, do a thing called night maps, which is like a collaborative, almost like a world building a little bit, a little relationship map building, but through hunting, we'll say. I'll get into that later, and sort of expanding on some of the hunter types or predator types. Then there's, of course, new lore sheets, backgrounds, merits, flaws, all of that, including some discipline flaws that really will open up and sort of change, I think, how a lot of people will play this game, at least discipline-wise. So all of you wanting more power, this is the book for you. And there is a cost. From more of a lore or storyteller side, they have collection of a lot of NPCs that will be useful in a horror campaign. They have kind of new ways to think about and explore, and some mechanics like touchstones, stains and humanities, convictions, all of the things that really build into the personal horror of the game, as well as they introduced 5th edition, the ghoul and the Baali, which I know a lot of people have a lot of feelings about, including myself, and I'll share them later. But a hint, I thought they were really stupid before, and I like what they did with them here. So that's what the book says it's trying to do, what's actually in the book, and now let's talk about, does it actually accomplish that? Does it what it set out to do? And yeah, it does. Like I said, this was a book I personally was like, when I read at least the pitch of it, was like, again, seems a little redundant, like how to put horror in a horror game. But like I said, there's more meat in this than I thought, specifically for players. It has a lot more options, and especially inspiration. This would be a really good one, not just to add to existing characters, but to sort of build a character from the ground up using some of these concepts. I think could be incredibly interesting. So plenty of mechanical options on the horror side, like I said, especially with some of the disciplines, and then a lot there for a storyteller as well, including just a lot of really interesting, like an examination of like horror as a genre, the different subgenres within that, and how to really ramp up the horror using things like touchstones and stuff like that you're gonna find some good inspiration for, guaranteed. Especially if you're someone new to vampire, I would put this really high up for, I think, one of the first supplemental books you can get, because I would assume you're drawn to horror if you're drawn to this game, and I think this really can, from the beginning, help you take your game to the next level, and again, just sort of build with a lot of these tools and advice in mind. But one of the things that the book intended to do was introduce the Baali. So technically succeeded in that, but if you're a fan of the old Baali, you're probably not gonna like it. I'll be honest, they really removed a lot of the stuff. It's a very sort of purposely vague and pared down concept, and not at all like the Infernalists of the old edition. So if you're like, oh, this is the Baali book, let me grab this so I can make my Baali character and do all that, that's not here. That's not this. That's not 5th edition. Personally, I don't really think it's vampire at all. I've talked in other videos about, like, I like a little cross-pollination in my splats, but like, there's so many cool vampire stories you could tell without having to like throw demons in. Leave the demons out. If you're a demon, the fallen player, do I want to start a war? I don't like that game. I love some of the ideas in it, but I've played it. Especially if you're Brazilian and demon's your favorite game, you're not welcome here. that was to a very specific person, but I'm realizing that probably covers a lot of people. So if you don't think I'm personally talking to you, I'm not. You're cool. You're fine. Back to the book. As I said, I think it delivers on the horror. And to really explain that, we got to get into it. So let's do our chapter by chapter dive. This book has 8 chapters, 1 appendix. I'll give you a quick synopsis of what each chapter is about, so you can hop around if you need to. Chapter 1, as they say, sets up our ecology, prey, habitat, hunting, and the rhythms of the night. This chapter sort of expands on the city as a setting and also hunting, the hunting systems. It introduces night maps, which expounds upon some of that. Chapter 2, what has to be sacrificed and by whom to keep the existence of the kindred secret night after night. And how can you make sure it's not your player characters? Basically, this is a chapter that takes a closer look at the Masquerade as sort of a tool and implementation of horror. Chapter 3 reveals the unwholesome side of each clan, which I don't know if many of them have a wholesome side to begin with, but yeah, this again looks like through a more horror lens at each of the clans again, including talking about potential like hooks and archetypes, which I want to see people use. Chapter 4, that's the disciplines. Chapter 5, it dives into convictions, stains, compulsions, touchstones, how to mechanically sort of ratchet up the horror using some of those rules. Chapter 6, that explores horror as a genre and the different subgenres of it and how to sort of think about those, incorporate those. It's almost like an academic, honestly, study chapter. A lot of great references, and you can tell, obviously, the writers of Vampire, they know their stuff, and this was the chapter I thought I would need the least, and genuinely really enjoyed reading. Chapter 7, this is NPCs, as well as some of the new monsters and things like that, including the Baali. The Baali are in this chapter. And also it's cryptids, necromancers, all that good stuff. Chapter 8 sort of wraps it all up, puts it all together, and gives like advice, like author to storyteller advice on how to structure, navigate horror in their game. And then the appendix, which are Loresheets. Chapter 1, Night in the City. The book's words, think of this chapter as a kind of nature documentary, or rather an unnature documentary. It lays out the ecosystems of the kindred as nocturnal predators in a mortal city. Like the predatory ecosystem in the natural world, it includes scavengers, parasites, opportunistic hunters, and symbiotes. But like many ecosystems, toxic elements throw it out of balance. So yeah, this introduces some kind of NPCs, some archetypes to use for like how to populate your city and people who are going to be involved in specifically the hunting process. The first starts with some of the people who are going to populate the city, blood bloggers, crime scene reporters, death cultists, graveyard poets, serial killers, just to name a few examples that they explore in here. Then there's a section called Down These Dark Streets. It's really interesting. It's an hour by hour breakdown of activities that are likely happening in a large city. And it's, again, if you're someone who probably isn't out and about throughout the entire night in your real life, this gives you kind of cool snapshots of like, all right, 1 a.m., these are some typical things happening. 3 a.m., these are some typical things happening, and some of the people you can expect out and about. It's really interesting. It's really good like set dressing and ways to like sort of anchor a city in something realistic in your setting. Then they have a section on districts for hunting purposes. Sort of how they've explored within Gehenna War of like a scene having different modifiers for different dice pools in battle. Districts sort of have the same thing, but for hunting. And they flesh out some examples here, like, you know, the rack sewers, fashion district, the finance district, the harbor, things like that. Again, really interesting things you could just plug into your game. Great for storytellers, or if you're creating a character and you're really thinking about like where they hunt specifically and what that's like, this is good for that as well. Then there's a section called predation cycles. This expands some of the rules on predator roles on hunting. Also verify some things that the book already verified, but I see some people get wrong sometimes. Like, you don't have to do your predator role. Your predator type is the way you typically feed. And this sort of explains, like, a lot of times you can't feed the way you prefer, and you might have to wing it a different way. And I think that's an interesting scenario, and not something that should be super restrictive, as more as something interesting to explore. And it has sort of a mechanical breakdown here of the stalk and the feed, right? The stalking part is when you roll your skill test against the district, the area's hunting difficulty. And then the feed, which has like a table of potential victims you can use, complications that can arise for each predator type. Also what happens on like a critical, like you can get dyscrasia. How you can win at a cost, where you still get the feed, but you get one of the complications from your predator type. Or total failure, where you don't get the feed and you have a complication. Or bestial failure, where not only do both of those bad things happen, but someone's alerted as well. Someone knows you're trying to feed. So it can ramp up the danger, and also be a nice quick reference for storytellers for hunting scenes. Also expands on Oblivion. Empty resonance, empty dyscrasia, those are introduced in here. So the Oblivion Eaters have some options and can play with their stuff as well. Those freaks out there who like their blood to taste devoid of emotion, now they get to have resonance dyscrasias too. Night maps. This is the expanded hunting thing I was talking about. And it's also a way to flesh out domains specifically. This also plays into the relationship map. So the first step is your coterie. You pick a district, then each player selects like a specific site in that district tied to their predator type, and it's added to your map. Then each player leads what's called a tour, where there's a list of questions they can ask about the district, and they can visit this site in like sort of a role play exploration to investigate it, interact with the residents, and sort of like a vignette that each player gets to do to sort of add a character or ask a question or build this scene with each other. And by the end of it, the idea is you've all sort of built out your hunting ground and fleshed it out a little bit. And that's something you could keep returning to and could end up really having some interesting story impact. Or at the very least, it's something more rooted and detailed than a storyteller having to just come up with something on the fly each time. It's a similar system to the Memoriam, actually. There's a random resident table, gives you 50 options, so a lot of meat to choose from. And some of the questions are really interesting too. Some examples are like, why are people on edge right now? Who's the peacemaker in this place? Who knows I'm connected to this place? I want to keep that a secret. One of the questions, what's in the basement? Classics. So yeah, really cool system. And I think very worthwhile to do, especially at a chronicle that's just starting. And the book emphasizes this too. It's not something you need to do every time you hunt, but a really cool way to build it out, and then also to sort of break things up pacing wise or introduce complications or plot through that, is to return to this system and keep building upon it as well. And it's a fun way for the players to be able to do a little world building with you. Chapter 2, the Masquerade Machine. The book introduces this with what keeps princes, and indeed all vampires, capable of remembering the past or imagining the future, awake all day, and not so much a nightmare as a vision of a global populace with internet, industry, and the knowledge that vampires are real and must be defended against. Past killings brought to light, the tales of literal bloodbaths and drained children confirmed. The kindred wouldn't last a month. Soon, only the lingering bodies of licks, occasionally rising from torpor to be burnt within weeks, would remind mortals of the predator they drove to extinction. It's about the masquerade. It's important. And yeah, it dives into the horror of that. It's something that I think in a lot of games I see, I'm kind of guilty of myself, where it becomes a thing of, oh no, we broke the masquerade, we're in trouble. Rather than, oh, we broke the masquerade, and then remembering, oh yeah, this thing is the only reason why we are allowed to exist. Breaking it isn't bad because the sheriff's gonna be mad at me. It's bad because each breach could be the one that tears it enough to bring the whole thing down. And you've now condemned Kindred to extermination just because you got sloppy. So this chapter explores that, and then also explores the political machine that keeps the masquerade. Options for the players to be involved in that, whether they're an enforcer or something, or an investigator of masquerade breaches. There's a section on different methods to keep the masquerade. Methods such as using terror to silence people, to using surveillance over your prey, blackmail, simply execution to make sure witnesses don't leak information, things like that. Also explores the city setting and some of the NPCs and the roles they might take to keep the masquerade or deal with those who breach it. And they have like story hooks for different types of masquerade breaches that could be used as sort of a masquerade horror plots, which is a interesting. The whole masquerade thing, I think, at least for personally, something that's sort of taken for granted or feels more like a setting thing. And this chapter made me realize that there is some like really interesting, like you run a whole chronicle around that. Like, you know, cleaning up, seeing the horrific acts your fellow kindred do, and doing cleanups or investigating kindred who have done cover-ups and things like that. It's a lot there that could really spin into something really interesting. Chapter 3, The Skull in the Mirror. So this chapter re-examines the clans through a more horror-focused lens, including some archetype examples I'll get into. And then also kind of gives you suggestions on how to build some of those with their certain traits they'll have and what disciplines they'll probably have as well. This chapter reintroduces the clans or re-examines them through a more horror-focused lens. I'll go into this actually probably clan by clan because I really liked this. And again, this would be great for new players who, especially a more just straight up horror tilt, want to build with these concepts in mind. I haven't leaned on archetypes a lot, but they have some really juicy examples of them here that I think are worth sharing. So they have the clan. They'll have kind of a re-examination of them. They have horrors, which are just like little bullet point prompts that I'll share some of that are really interesting. Each introduces a new archetype and then some story hooks of how they could be in play in a chronicle. Banhukim, one of the horror hooks I have for them is to care for something, is to force it into the right shape. The archetype there for that is Reformer. Reformer cannot bear the thought of justice without remorse. What can be accomplished if wrongdoers don't understand what they've done, not just intellectually, but emotionally? If they haven't felt as their victims felt, how can they know they truly, finally deserve their fate? Oh, I love that. I love that. Bruja, one of the examples for that is the revolution will come, and after it, peace. And then the revolution must begin again anew and keep the blood flowing. Gangrel, one of their samples is you feel the heat of the animal desire to reproduce, dreaming of your child as an invasive species, stripping the city clean of everything but the cockroaches. Akata, everything dies, yet nothing gets to rest. They have an archetype for this called Mother's Boy, which is familiar with the movie Psycho. You'll get it. A Sombra, one of their examples as ambition leaves you on unstable ground, teetering on a pile of victims and enemies. Only an iron grasp on power can keep you from tumbling into someone else's pile. They have the archetype of the libertine, which says, what started out as a means to alleviate boredom has become an obsession for the libertine. Having clawed out a comfortable position in the society of night for themselves, they now compete with others of the rank for the honor of committing the cruelest and most clever crimes. Playing the desperate victim or the handsome stranger as best befits the situation, they select their mark, toy with their emotions, and torture them to death as artfully as possible. Malkavian, the person in the mirror is never who you expect to see. They have an archetype of the dreamer. When nothing feels real, your actions don't matter. The dreamer's senses are so clouded by the intrusive premonitions, auditory and visual hallucinations that they've mostly given up on sorting the imagined from the real. They ignore the sound of babies crying because it never stops. They look straight through the sobbing prisoner chained up in their kitchen and the piss that pools beneath them. They're getting the edgy's back, baby. They lean into it at this. And this is not mad about it. Ministry, one of the hooks I like for them is the best rush comes from someone else desperate for a rush, discovering their crutch broken when they need it most. Nosferatu, mortal blood rushes dizzyingly fast through their veins, carrying it with it the mutations and diseases and parasites of organic life. It disgusts you almost as much as you crave it. Oh, the archetype there for this is the embedded. So the embedding is this Nosferatu practice of infiltrating a target's life so completely that you live vicariously through them. Because again, Nosferatu can't have a normal life. What's the word? They find an opening, a cellar window, a crack in the foundation, an unfinished wall, and slide their gangly bodies, not through, but sideways, slipping into the walls of the house itself. The warm insulation and soothing rustle of mice and centipedes make for a cozy cocoon during the day. And at night, they peer through air ducts and peepholes to watch the residents meander through the rooms in their sweatpants. The embedded don't even eat their targets half the time. It's a different sort of game they play, one of time, imagination, and suspense. What if they dwelt in this house? What if they stayed up late to write an assignment? What if they began to feel the first prickles of paranoia that somehow someone was watching them? I hate this, because this is something that freaks me out. Having an attic, I feel like at any moment, any time I hear like a noise, I was like, it's just a noise. But I'm like, what if someone's living in my attic? You got to think about these things. And they know I think about these things, so they made it an archetype to fuck with me. Oh, Ravnos. You haven't seen the sun in years, but it remembers you. It waits to burn away the lies. Salubri. You indulge in long fasts, reveling in the pit in your stomach, making yourself feel so clean and controlled. Toreador. You've become a work of art. You're exposed, posed, and admired. You can hear yourself speak, but the words are not your own. When you try to scream, only a laugh like silver bells escape. Tremere. You've created a homunculus, who is your own smaller copy. It's forced to obey you, but you could tell from its eyes how it hates you. I feel like that's just a typical, no good Tremere, honestly. Zamitzi. You finally got it all. The entire block is yours. Is your blood bond thrall looking at you with envy? Best to kill them now and start patrolling your domain yourself. Ventru. Create a refugee crisis overseas to fill the streets with desperate strangers, inspire a serial killer to drive tabloid clicks, hollow out a biotech firm to get access to 1 million stored blood samples, anything to make the line go up. Which is fucked up, but also I think probably just the common line of thinking for most CEOs. Caitiff. Why shouldn't you become the monster they fear you to be? Or better yet, a monster they haven't learned to fear yet. Duskborn. The people you want most to protect refuse to give up on you. They'll die unless you can convince them you despise them, maybe even at your hands. So yeah, those are just little snippets of inspiration for each of the clans, and like I said, it's worth reading these. For especially a lot of the players who are play vampire like I'm still good and nice and cool, but sometimes I accidentally feed or whatever. I like how this explores like, no, it's kind of horrific to be what you are. And here's how it's specifically horrific depending on your clan. Chapter 4, Darkness in the Blood. This is the chapter on disciplines. I'll pick out some interesting ones and share them with you. There's a lot in here. And like I said, I didn't think this would be like a discipline heavy book for like a more of just like how to run horror, but written good. Animalism. They have Awaken the Parasite. Vampires are dead, but that doesn't mean they're devoid of life. As they rest, bugs rest and nest within them. And if they eat, there's traces of food that remain to rot in their gut. And even the blood they consume festers long enough to provide sustenance for more than just the vampire. These parasitic eggs normally remain unhatched and dormant, but once his power is engaged, they rapidly mature, writhing beneath the skin, escaping from eye sockets and orifices, chewing through flesh and swelling the body to the bursting point. The result is a disgustingly grim reminder of what lives within them. I hate that. I love that. Just factually of like something I think of like yeah, you're still a walking corpse. You could be the most polished toreador, and unless you're like getting a full, someone's literally getting inside there and giving you a cleaning, you're probably gonna have some gross stuff in there. And the idea that someone can awaken that in you and you can make a toreador at Elysium, their skin start literally crawling and then bugs come out of all sorts of places they shouldn't. Oh, that's, the possibilities are rich. There's a couple rituals. One's called Grim Chrysalis, where the vampire produces a large quantity of thick, bloody keratin spit, which hardens around them to a protective cocoon. Within the cocoon, healing and transformation significantly accelerate, while a shell protects the vampire from damage. Literally just like a puke blood cocoon for a kindred. Would love to run into one of those. There's a ritual called the Balm of Bathory, which you can imagine what that might be, where you bathe in blood and you look younger, more beautiful. You get the perks of this stunning merit, but the amount of mortal blood required doubles for each brew, and the brew's addictive. So again, you can see how these disciplines are, the act of them themselves is terrible, but also like there's the implied horror of your character of, again, the price rising and needing to get more and more, and also you're literally the addiction, the desperation that'll be driving you to commit these horrific acts, to do this thing. It's they're cooking here. Celerity has 1,000 cuts.
1,000 cuts!
If you're a blade player, you are not welcome here unless you're on the other team. And please feed me. This is a celerity. The vampire makes tons of cuts that suddenly appear at once on someone. Doesn't hurt kindred as much, but obviously it fucks up mortals and induces a hunger frenzy test for any kindred around, because suddenly there's blood everywhere. Fortitude, something called Calloused Soul. For many kindred, the encroachment of the beast is the biggest existential threat they could face. Remember that, players. Humanity matters. Nightly existence creates countless moments, threats, and opportunities where they're forced to betray what matters to them. Rather than risk their selfhood to random degeneration, this power allows a vampire to preemptively self-inflict a wound upon their humanity. By doing so, they numb themselves against future atrocities, freeing themselves to do what needs to be done, no matter how despicable. Mechanically, you have to do something that involves at least 3 mortal deaths, and you take 3 stains, then you can't take stains for the rest of the night. And this is like mechanically interesting, but also I love the implication of it. Like, you do something really fucked up, and also like the creativity I'm sure people will lean into on what that thing is. But because of that, you're just sort of like emotionally numb the rest of the night. So then you could go do something that is even more fucked up than that. Like, doing this means I'm about to do something that would be worse than taking 3 stains. 3 stains is not nothing. So I don't know, the implication of what the fuck are you up to where this was worth it? Terrifying. Oh, I love it. There's an obfuscate amalgam. It's obfuscate 4, dominate 1, called seclusion. It's a reverse obfuscate where you make the target not able to see anyone around them, where they will feel that they are isolated and alone, unable to hear or see or feel any other beings in their surrounding, which could have all sorts of really creative uses, as well as just sort of slowly driving someone mad. There's a Oblivion 5 power called the Darkness Within. Kindred philosophers have long contemplated the nature of the split self, the Jungian anima, the vampiric beast, and what the dead refer to as their shadow. Does this dark half exist in all creatures? Does everyone harbor their own self-destructive mirror of rage and pain? Those skilled in Oblivion feel they've answered this question and have empirical evidence to prove it. This cruel power forcibly expels and manifests the negative and violent parts of a person's psyche. They might vomit forth their fears, witness their shadow forcibly peel away, or catch the reflection from the corner of their eye and notice an unexpected bloodlust in their eyes. This evil twin is so consumed with self-loathing that they immediately attack their host, seeking to drag them down to the same endless pit of despair from which they hail. So you literally look at someone, rip an evil doppelganger out of them, and then that creature then just does everything it can to kill the person you ripped it out of. Also one that, what an insane scene to happen. The Oblivion ceremonies were already obviously horror tilted. They got more. They got more fuss here. They have a craft flesh golem, which is different than it's a more of a Frankenstein's monster than a shambling horde situation. There's a ceremony called Create Corpse Suit, where you make a skin suit, put on your skin pants, and that skin reacts to danger and can warn you of danger. When you are the danger, dude, if you're wearing skin pants. I don't know what else to tell you. There's Bind to Mortal Form, where you can keep a human alive past their normal lifespan, which you can also do by ghouling, but this is different because they still age physically and mentally. They just don't die, but they're super old and probably insane. What's the point of this? Why? But also, I'd love to, it's really interesting stories you could build off of this too. Then there's a level 5 ceremony for the mother boys out there, the Gift of True Life. You open a vein into mortals' wrists, tie them together, and then you push the blood from one into the other. For every 5 minutes of siphoning blood this way, the targeted mortal loses 10 years of life and gives it to the other one, meaning the other person ages more slowly. They don't disease as easily and things like that. I mean, they can still die from other ways, but essentially you're taking the natural lifespan from one person and putting it into another with a transfusion. There's a Presence 3 discipline, Passion Leech, where it's essentially you're an emotional vampire, where you channel all the emotions out of a person so you can feel them in a heightened sense. Mechanically, it gives you all the effects that Humanity 10 would give you until sunset. But you can only do this once a night, and the victim loses any resonance they may have had, then becomes an empty resonance. And it says, while empty of resonance, the target can freely indulge in their basest desires, descending into psychopathy with no higher nature or positive emotion to push back on these impulses. Again, mechanically cool. And depending on who you could feed from, could really have some interesting consequences. Thin Bloods, our alchemists, got some stuff too. Also a level 5 formula called the Bomb, where you turn a human into a walking time bomb. And essentially you feed them this formula, And then you can make a rouse check while it's active, and they blow up, causing twice their stamina and aggravated damage to anyone who gets hit. And Kindred also have to make a hunger frenzy test while near this explosion. This makes Blood Sigils already made Thin Blood so cool and so scary, and then this really ramps it up. Also, I like it in a way where a lot of times it's like the Thin Bloods are the victims, which they are, of like full-blooded Kindred. But I like that this like leans into like those little fuckers could be more evil also. I like the thing of like, you're scared of them, let's give you a reason to be. Any human couldn't explode on you if you've pissed off the Duskborn. Now, one of the most interesting things in this book is a new mythic flaw called Ingrained Discipline. So how this works basically is it lets you take more discipline powers without needing more dots in exchange for a big drawback, because there's one of these flaws for each discipline, and each discipline has its own bad thing that happens. So to take this, you have to have at least 3 levels in a discipline, and also storyteller consent, as it reminds you in this book, because this could fundamentally really change and really make some of the players a lot more powerful, really just have more disciplines. So when you get this flaw, you get 3 ranks worth of new powers in that discipline that you still have to spend XP to get them, but they're not restricted to how many dots you have. So you can have 3 dots in celerity, and you can have 6 celerity disciplines. But of course, as long as the level is below 3, or below whatever the level is when you purchase this. The XP cost is still calculated as if you've bought them at the appropriate level for the first time. But yeah, they don't affect the overall discipline rating. So this is wild. Obviously this could be abused, but I like this. I like more discipline abilities. I think as a longtime storyteller is fun. I think that's why I go kind of wild with XP, is because I like people having options and playing with their powers. But a big problem is, like, especially at level 5, a lot of these powers I hate. Not that I hate, but there's so many I win buttons at level 5 that really just take away some of the interesting challenges that would come up in your story. So this, I think, is a really good way to... Players have options. They still have like different ways to solve their problems or to influence the world without also having their I win button. Now, there's anything wrong with that, but this is a fun way of staving that off for a while. Now, my gripe with this is that all of these flaws are not created equal. Because they said, like, Auspex has one, Celerity has one, like, they each have their own flaw you take. And some are rough, and others are just sort of not, I feel like, aren't as bad as they should be. So this is something I would need to explore a little more, as far as like some of these flaws I think need to be worse, personally. But I'll give you just a few examples of them. There's the Auspex flaw is called Daymares. While rarely recalling more than an acute sense of terror, the vampire's daylight rest becomes plagued by horrifying visions, causing them to sweat blood. So when awakening for the night, make 2 rouse checks instead of the usual 1. Really, it's not that bad. An extra rouse check in order to have access to 3 more discipline powers than you would have, I think is wildly cheap exchange. Again, you're still spending XP, so that still balances out in a way. But for example, Celerity, they have Breakdown. Vampire's physiology runs at the same pace as a vampire, burning blood and energy at equal volumes. Whenever the vampire fails a rouse check when activating a Celerity power, they sustain a point of aggravated health damage, and their body withers and ages before their very eyes. That's brutal. You get ag every time you fail a rouse check when using this your Celerity, as well as having like a physical, potentially Masquerade breaching reaction. That versus just The Auspex one, I make an extra rouse check at the beginning of the night, and then I could just do my normal hunting and take care of it. I get those things. They're both 3-dot flaws, but they feel completely different to me. But also, I do like, again, the horror aspect of some of these. Like Daymare's is a good like RP horror thing, just mechanically not that bad. I like the Presence one. Presence one is Egomaniac. Having had others consistently fawn over you has stroked your ego to the point where you can't tolerate a world without you at its center. Whenever a presence power generates a messy critical or fails to sway your target, you must make a Fury Frenzy test at difficulty 2. Has like big RP consequence. Like you have to play a fully self-absorbed asshole at that point. But also is a pretty rough mechanically. Like messing up, not even just losing on your dice tests, not even necessarily getting a messy criticals enough to then make you do a Fury Frenzy, which can be very bad, but it's a low difficulty. So to me, this one, like, I like this a lot. In all ways, this feels good. Has some roleplay implication that like actually is a flaw that you would have to roleplay out, and to your detriment, mechanically feels like a big enough burden as well, but not overly punishing. Chapter 5, The Darkness Within. This gets into humanity, convictions, touchstones, ambition, desire, re-explores all of those things mechanically, and just expounds upon how to use them as a storyteller to really drive home some of the horror elements. This also has new compulsions, which I really like, because you end up cycling through the same few over and over again. But this adds dependency, masochism, overkill, and repetition, which I think are very interesting and horror appropriate additions to the compulsion list. It's hard to like sum this one up, because again, this really like dives into these as concepts more than anything. But one thing I'll point out that stuck out to me is the convictions section. It says convictions act both as strongly held beliefs the player characters cling to, and as loopholes for the players to exploit. They allow the character to violate chronicle tenets with fewer stains, which is the primary mechanical function of Vampire. When players use their convictions to avoid stains, they're doing it right. Their characters' need to feel remorse lessens, and their chance of feeling remorse increases. When a character does feel remorse, provides the player for an opportunity to explore the horror of the character's actions to inhabit their inner emotional world. From a player's perspective, the best convictions are the ones that let the character feel remorse for doing what had to be done. This is kind of the opposite of how I viewed convictions. And at first, my initial reaction was like, this is a mistake. This is bad. This is a personal pet peeve of mine, when I can feel players using their convictions as convenient loopholes to just still be monsters, and they're kind of the catch-all, so they don't have to take stains, but don't have to really grapple with the humanity thing. But you know what? I'll admit, I'm still not totally sold, but I'm a little more open to it now. I think the sticking point for me is the remorse, because oftentimes, I see it a lot, is players are very good at justifying, or their characters are good at justifying the bad thing they did, right? They're like, oh, I retained my humanity because here's logically why I had to kill him, or like, they're really good at coming up with reasons. That's literally the opposite of how humanity works. If you don't feel bad for it, you lose humanity. If you did something bad, you should feel bad. That makes you human. High humanity doesn't mean you're a saint. High humanity means you have a conscience, and you are able to understand, and you can hate yourself for what you've done. You can do bad things, but as long as you genuinely feel bad about it and feel that in your being and take actions to avoid it, you're human. I think that's a common misconception, is high humanity are like, oh, they're saints, they're good, they love everything. It's like, no, they could be as flawed as everyone else. They just fucking they struggle with it more. They feel remorse. So all of you that are really clever at like, oh, I'm justifying killing this person because of this, this, and this. Congratulations, you've lost humanity. You're a vampire. Vampires think that way. Of people's lives are things that could be you can take as long as you can justify it. Justification for killing typically isn't not very humanity of you. So with that in mind, going back to their, hey, players should use convictions as loopholes to do these things. Yeah, but I want to feel the RP. I want to feel the remorse, not just, oh, my conviction is don't let anyone fuck with me. So I kill people who are mean to me. Like, nah, dude, you got like a couple weeks until you're a white. Another interesting thing, they talk about convictions being able to shatter. Like we leaned on too much or used too much, and the characters have gone through an arc or changed this conviction, and they can break psychologically from that, which is an interesting thing to explore as well. You lean on this conviction too much to do bad things. How strong is that conviction really? Let's test the limits of it. What happens when it breaks? Chapter 6, Shades of Darkness. This dives into the different genres of horror. It dives into horror in general, and they have a lot of, like I said, great media pulls and references, and you could tell like the sort of the almost academic study of horror as a genre that I found to be a fascinating read. Loved it. They also provide a lot of like specific examples for the different, some of the subgenres they have is, personal, political horror, of course. They use the phrase late stage vampirism and political horror, which I really liked. Then psychological horror, body horror, gothic horror, folk horror, and cosmic horror are all sections in this that they explore as like from a meta side, and then also give you specific scenarios and examples on how to use them in your game. And this is another chapter that for me to get into, I would just be doing like an essay on the horror genre, which I could do, but not in this review. Chapter 7, Night Terrors. This is the chapter that introduces the other creatures, including the Baali. They have the Apulu? Again, another vampire word. Who knows how we're supposed to pronounce it? So these were introduced in the Blood Sigils book. There's stats in there. There's some information on them. But I'll be honest, I love that book, and I don't remember them a lot there because I remember it being like a little vague and a little confusing for me, and nothing about them really captured my attention. There's varieties of them in that, and there's 2 more stats for them in this book. But this made me reread and sort of understand them better. Makes it a little more interesting, specifically, as I mentioned before, for potential Dark Ages stuff. So this is sort of their catch-all name for a dark spirit. And again, these things could be like Nefandi in Mage or a Bane in a Werewolf. But it's, again, I don't like when like the specific tags are used and then like there's the conceptions that come with them and the rules that come with them. I like Apulu as sort of a catch-all. It could be a demon, it could be Jinn, it's a dark spirit. The word means in Akkadian, one who answers is the Apulu. The Apulu come from the blood, capital B, the sorcerer's blood, Vitae, or that of their lineage, in response to the sorcerer's evocation. So these are spirits and stuff that you're going to interact with, summon, deal with using blood sorcery. They usually don't have a physical form, but they provide a gift or service at a cost in a dark deal. They typically have an uncanny knowledge of the one who summoned them. They know their weaknesses, they know their desires, so they know how to use them against them. They're also immune to mind powers. They're weak to sunlight. And if they do take a physical form, they do aggravated damage to kindred. And they have levels, like spirits do in werewolf. A power level. So it's kind of, I'll talk about it after, but I have feelings about like demon summoning and vampire. But I like this as it's vague enough and it's malleable enough to be useful in a variety of chronicles without all the mechanical jargon and specifics and ties to other nonsensical things. This chapter is the Baali. So, in 5th edition, a Baali simply means a kindred that is possessed by an Apulu. So, again, if you know other splats, it's kind of like a Fomori in Werewolf. The book says some kindred scholars consider them a type of white, the one with a seemingly intact intellect. Little remains of their original kindred, save possibly a tiny tortured remnant to be worn as a skin suit by the primordial entity that now occupies their body and their blood. AKA, these aren't player characters. So they are possessed kindred. They have the disciplines of a kindred, though they don't terror or fury frenzy. It says the beast has emulsified within their blood, though they could still messy crit or hunger frenzy. They're described as their blood in a husk. Even Scry the Soul can't really discern exactly what they are, though with a crit you can. And it says many Baali seem to hold some grudge against the Banu Hakim and Salubri and show a sadistic glee in harming them. They especially covet the Duskborn, Malkavians, and others who claim to hear the antediluvians speak, unless their claims prove overly ambitious. So yeah, these aren't the infernalists, the evildoers, the hand-rubbing villains of the old edition that, again, I never felt really fit, especially in modern vampire. But this stuff, talking to spirits, messing with demons, and again, I like that Apple can mean so if you want these to be like, hey, these are demons, like World of Darkness, actual demon things, they can be that. If you want them to be Banes, they could be that. Like, I like that it gives you the freedom to make it work for your chronicle, but also without overly defining it. It's not cementing them in the lore in a way that they have to be in a chronicle. Not that anything has to be. You can't make me do shit. So mechanically, going into that a little further, they typically have blood sorcery because someone had to have summoned them using blood sorcery, so that's probably who got possessed. They typically have blood sorcery 4 or higher, as well as blood potency 6, and 2 other disciplines at over 2. They have different versions here, a manipulator, a sorcerer, and a thief. They have a cool mechanic I like, though, that they can do an insight check against a target, and for each point of margin on a success, they can use that as an automatic success for any future roll against that character. Sort of like, again, as these creatures can know someone's weaknesses and stuff, they're able to read someone, and then if they do well enough on their insight, can almost pocket those successes to put on later dice pools that they might need against them. And a blood sorcerer who knows the true name of the Apulu possessing the Baali can create a ward against it with a level 3 discipline. So Baali don't have a big lore thing in this. They're mostly an NPC stat block and some information. Moving on to other creatures, there's also cryptids. Some examples I have are the Screecher, which is a half man, half bat. Which could have funny implications in the vampire world. And Gutter Gorgon, which seems to just be a lizard that eats people, but I love the word, I love the title Gutter Gorgon. Then they have flesh golems. They have some new ghost wraith types in here, including a Skinlock. It's a ghost that like pretends to be someone who recently died. Like someone died, and that person comes back and I was like, I thought you're dead. They're like, no, misunderstanding, I'm back, cool. And then they stick around and like haunt the people that thought they were dead. It's this weird gaslighting entity. Then there's a ghoul, Thul, which I guess are from older editions. I wasn't as familiar with them, but that's another thing they're throwing in here, like the Baali. The book says, according to old Arabian legends, the first Jilan were fallen jinn, punished for sharing divine knowledge with humankind. Others claim they were evil people cursed to live as demons. The truth has been lost to time, but the fact remains that the Gilan are creatures of extremes, part suffering, part bliss. So, what these are they look like attractive humans. They're like seducers, hedonists, but they have to eat flesh each night. And when they eat flesh, they turn into this hideous monster as they do so. Kind of cool. Lore-wise, I'm not sure it's adding a lot, but I sort of as a monster of the week style thing or something weird for people to run into. I kind of like that concept. Chapter 8, storytelling horror. So like the earlier chapter, this is like for storytellers, but rather than chapter 4 explored horror as a genre, this gives you like step-by-step things to do as a storyteller. The chapters like this are gold for new storytellers specifically. This section's on planning your game, pre-play preparations, how to create characters for horror stories, setting the mood, suspense and pacing, setting and story. Also a section called Dark Art Heartbeats, ways for players to support the horror atmosphere. Sometimes players aren't great at playing into the genre of the game. Even as actually breaks down to like how to tap into different techniques or the different fears for like an online game versus a one-shot versus a streamed game. It's interesting, and maybe they've done it before, but I've not caught it as much. And then section on endings, which I think is the greatest challenge for horror in any media. So I like that they acknowledge that too and give you advice for that. Then the book ends with one appendix of Loresheets. These are bloodline Loresheets that threaten the balance or the Masquerade. There's a Malkavian one, descendant of Anku, who is a Malkavian psychopomp who's obsessed with death and visions of it, and also apparently is a vicious streak. Has an interesting mechanic where it can give additional specialties, and also lets you, as a Malkavian, have Oblivion as an in-clan discipline. There's a Toreador, Loresheet, descendant of Baron Valgir, who was a sadistic Toreador who knew flesh crafting, and then sired and slayed dozens of childer. Descendant of Montano, who, if you know, you know, the La Sombra ancient who influenced the rise of Christianity in Europe, and also one of the La Sombra elders who's a Camarilla loyalist. And there's little siblings, the Rosalini, a bloodline of Facade, which actually this was a kind of interesting one. The Rosalini never were especially interesting to me. They always felt like a fun kind of lower rung, thuggish Hakata, Giovanni. But in this, they're rivals to Giovanni, and their main difference is that they're more cruel, how they deal with wraiths. This has options where you can heal from feeding on fetters, and ways you can always deal aggravated damage to ghosts. So yeah, I don't know. Something about the idea of like, a fetter is the thing that's important to a ghost and how you can control the wraith. And a Rosalini be able to just fucking eat the thing, just terrible consequences for the ghost psychologically, but also heal from that. That's fun. I like that. So that's the book. My final thoughts. Like I mentioned before, I didn't go into this thinking I would get a lot out of it, because I'm at this point really experienced in playing vampire. I play I think a horror heavy vampire, though I let the players guide a lot of it. But I got a lot of inspiration from this, and I think this was especially useful for players, actually, in a way that I didn't expect. I do see in games I watch, and even some I've ran, a lot of players, I think, either forget or maybe even get bored with sort of the 5th edition emphasis on humanity, the personal horror. People still like playing, your edgy anti-hero, and barely that. And again, like, disclaimer for everything, there's no wrong way. Everyone can do whatever they want. This is, again, my personal preferences of I like the drama of, like, it's scary, it's fucked up how you're slipping, your humanity's slipping, and so people who just dive right into the monster thing, it's like, oh, I'm a monster who does politics, and I have these convictions, that's why I'm cool being evil. I think that kind of ignores a lot of the horror. So this book, I think, can reconceptualize some things or help anchor some character concepts in horror from the beginning, if new players especially read this. And then the opposite end of that is people play characters who are like, I'm the exception to the rule. I'm nice. I'm a good vampire, despite everything in my existence suggesting otherwise. Where I'm moral. I have an excuse for everything, and that makes me good, even though excusing things actually makes me lose humanity, as I talked about before. I like this as kind of could maybe help open some people's eyes to how terrible it kind of is and how unsettling, at least it is, to just exist as a vampire, which should be obvious. But this, especially with the clan part, I think introduces some specific, detailed looks and sort of concepts, pitches that I think will really hit home or hopefully inspire people. Like it did me. I really liked that section, and that's when I initially sort of skimmed through. And like from just the practical advice, it's something about TTRPG too, even though it's not a lot of like horror games, World of Darkness being the prominent one, I'd say, Call of Cthulhu too. But everyone's a horror expert, and I think a lot of people could get a lot out of reading this, myself included. Like I said, they did their homework. They did a good job of breaking it down in a useful way to be applied in TTRPGs. The expanded hunting, I like the idea of night maps. It's not something I can see myself using a ton. The game just has so much. I'm not great at tapping into all the stuff. I don't think I've ever ran like a memoriam or things like that. But I think night maps, on my initial read, I was sort of on it. I will say, just doing this, making this video, re-examining that, I kind of like it more as having, a weakness of mine is I don't think I flesh out like the rack where you hunt in as interesting of a way. I think I got bored kind of early on with hunting. And like a lot of times I don't have people roll for it. When I do, it's like, we'll play it out if there's an interesting dice result. Otherwise, we can use this as just some character flavor. But I think this is something I could benefit from. And also, yeah, it is cool kind of building out a district, a section of the city. I'm not great at using like the lean Portillion domain hunting rules. But I think this makes it more approachable and also gets more buy-in from the players, so everyone is a little more interesting in hunting mechanics when appropriate. I still am never going to be someone who makes you roll to hunt constantly every time, but running a night map, running a tour, I think could be cool, especially, and I like things that give players a chance to invites them to add some flavor and some concrete setting. Some highlights for me. The disciplines, it's a thing where like, I hate that it works. I'm like, they throw a few disciplines at us and we're always hungry to check them out. But they're usually good. And this is, I think, maybe since Blood Sigils obviously had so many, there's I really like the options there. I would say this is the second strongest, or maybe the strongest showing of additional disciplines that they've had in a long time. And the ingrained discipline flaw too. Love what that can open up mechanically. Another highlight, I like the archetypes. I like the clan archetypes, and even if a way for players to take some inspiration from. And I'm someone who has never built a character using a clan archetype, but I would like to see some of these. I would love to run games for some of these. Maybe controversial if you're a Baali fan. A highlight for me is that they really chopped it up. I neutered them. I think it makes sense. It's sort of a catch-all apple, a demon, not like a full bloodline of like, is this a bloodline of this clan or that clan, or what are they really? And introducing like literal demons isn't something is compelling to me in Vampire. Which which is ironic because I have a group of players that has a major storyline involving a demon. But spoilers, because we're not playing that Chronicle anymore, and I don't know if we'll return to it. It wasn't a demon. That's for 4 people out there. But yeah, the old school Baali I did not like. They're very anime to me. You know, it's this, I'm a half demon, half angel, chosen one, fighter of like, this is the I'm a half vampire, half demon. Like, come on. The Tremere are pushing it enough with their half made shit. I can't do half demon. I just can't do it. So them just being essentially a creature type of when someone summons a spirit and gets possessed by it because they couldn't handle it. I like that. And also, I'm open to the idea of like reaching out to the spirits and having like ritual. There's some of the disciplines in this are rituals to deal with the Apulu demons, Banes, whatever they are in your world. And it's not the worst. And like I said, specifically, this came out at a great time because Dark Ages. Very excited to run that. Come play with me. That's the setting. That's the flavor I think this stuff is perfect for. So yeah, all in all, really happy with this book. Pleasantly surprised. Not that it would be bad, but again, I just thought like, oh, this one's not for me. But it was. And I got humbled a little bit. Reimagined some things. Inspired me to lean into the horror and some things like the Masquerade. I do like... I can ramp up the existential threat behind a broken Masquerade in my games in a way that would be really cool for me. And yeah, it's got, if you're just looking for options, more options for your character, more disciplines and stuff like that, it's a good book to have. This is some of the coolest and interesting and mechanically strong disciplines they've thrown out in a minute. And if you're a storyteller, especially a new storyteller, like, I think this should, honestly, I would say like this player's guide or core book player's guide, and then this to like, assuming horror's your jam, this will really help you get into World of Darkness, into this right mindset, and introduce, especially if new players are introduced to this style of vampire, those are gonna be some good players. They're gonna have good habits from the beginning. So yeah, all in all, really dig this book. Got a lot more use out of it as a seasoned horror storyteller than I thought I would. And I'm excited to utilize some of these things in the very near future. So for now, this chapter is closed. Our ritual must end. Thank you for letting me in, and never forget to close the door.